Board meeting on March 9th is the Curriculum and Ed Planning Committee with the full committee present. We'll begin with a review of the meeting aims and then move to approve previous meeting minutes.
Great. Great. So I can do the meeting objectives for tonight. So really, this is our opportunity to revisit where we are with the equity policy. We had hoped to do this last month, but for a variety of reasons, pushed it to this month. So I think Barrett, Mickey, and I are all super excited to update you all on the work that's underway and to get feedback at this stage in the process. So that's our main objective for tonight.
Perfect. Thank you, Malia. Before we dive in there, we have the matter of approving the minutes from our November 18th, 2020 meeting, which we delayed to this meeting with waiting for Member Bondo to return. So first off, is there a motion to approve those minutes? Yes. So moved by Roberto and seconded by Mickey. And all in favor of approving with the hands? Great. Thank you. And then there's the approval of the meeting minutes from January 28th meeting. That Roberto moves. I'll second. Mickey, you were
abstain.
Abstain, yeah. So first by Roberto, seconded by myself, if that's allowed, and then 2 in favor, 1 abstain. Yeah. Great. Off we go.
Okay. Just as a quick caveat, if we can stop right at 7:30, that would be great, because I have 15 minutes to get my son to the rink, and he's very nervous about that. I think Mickey or Barrett, Barrett, you were gonna kick us off by first just beginning an update as to where we've been in terms of process. And then Mickey, if you want to chime in on that as well. So let's start with that before we transition into looking at current draft of the policy itself.
Sorry, my internet stopped for a hot second. Can you just, I'm just going to frame like kind of where we're at in the process. Is that what you said? Just to.
Oh yeah. Yep. Like I think that's what we talked about, right? You would give kind of the update on process, and Mickey and I can chime in with additional.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to remember the last time we met, but time is kind of fake these days. What happened when is becoming a little lost for me. So we have had monthly meetings with a stakeholder work group that represents folks, including Mickey, Malia, and I, as well as staff and students and parents from across the district. So we've been meeting monthly, and interspersed with that, I've been meeting with the student group separately, which has had kind of intermittent attendance. But as I've had facilitation support from Portland Empowered, from Muntaha Mohammed, which has been wonderful to kind of collaborate with her and with that organization further around student involvement. So some of the students involved were part of the Reimagine Education project that they did over the summer. And so it's a good kind of continuation and through line of some of that work. In any event, and we started doing stakeholder conversations. So we've had a number of those specific, like full stakeholder conversations with social workers, a group of BIPOC staff that was led by one of the members in the committee, as well as Julia Hazel, who really has helped facilitate, some of the convenings for those folks. And a couple of conversations with the Family Community Partnership work group, and some tuning from the academic leadership team, the student work group, and the full policy work group. So that's sort of what's happened so far. I think one of the next big steps will be tuning with the equity leaders cohort and with a series of staff work groups that we'll run as like optional kind of times to get staff feedback once we're ready for like the next big kind of like infusion of tuning and feedback. Overall, just wanted to share that there's just been like very positive feedback that we're doing this when we brought it up, just enthusiasm that we're doing it. Really a lot of commitment from people to want to use it as a way to help frame equity, and a recognition that everyone has experienced times where it's like people are talking about the same issue very differently and all using equity, and how much that's not working kind of systemically. And so I think that there's a lot of, I think people are like, oh, this will help. Like, I think a hope and a belief that this will help with that, which is, of course, what we have talked about and our intention behind that too. And then, you'll see in the draft, if you haven't already, some of the naming of history and present and holding ourselves accountable. Very positive feedback for that. Just like naming the current and past injustices and how we're trying to do better. So we've had some good thinking around like, what are the things that really need to be included in this policy, which when it was more kind of a brainstorming, and now we're kind of moving into like, because people are reflecting on something that actually exists. It's not just, let's brainstorm what it means to define equity. We have that. And so people are able to kind of really sink their teeth into it a little bit more about like, well, what about how we say this? And what about how we say that? And like wanting to really get into those nuance because it matters, which is exciting. So I think you have the summary of feedback I put together just so you can skim that. But, for reference, if it's of interest, and I'll keep, updating that as we continue to fine tune with additional edits. So you'll see we've done some kind of a purpose statement and starting to have some of the definitions, and we've had some dialogue with stakeholder groups about like what definitions, why, what should be spelled out, what should be named, all of that. And I think some of that is becoming clearer, and some of that is going to get even more clear as we get into like a more refined full policy, like with the sections and how it relates. But people are really thinking towards that. Like, well, okay, we've got to talk about staff development, or we need to talk about training on this policy, and where does that go? And, so that's, I think, I'm happy to answer questions, but I think that that's kind of my quick summary of like where we're at.
Thanks, Barrett. Mickey, is there anything else you'd want to add just in terms of process to date?
Yes. Thank you, Manny. The sense that I just get from the last feedback we got from the stakeholder is that how we can adjust some of the standards on the policy standards, because my sense, I didn't want people to lose the aspect of the equity lens coming as a narrow, because we have a lot of definition. Each of them, they have a different ways to see equity, but how can we have that one as an ownership? How we can own it? How can we customize to the reality that we're facing in our Portland Public School? So that means we don't duplicate something else, but everything that we're building as a foundation, why we're doing it. And I think also to that context is that we have a stakeholder, teachers, staff, and everybody, but most of us, we have those language, but it's not applying to our work as a teacher or as a staff on the field. So how we can hold accountable for those aspects of different policies surrounding the equity than we try to build right now, so each of us can reflect when we're taking actions, when we're teaching in the classroom, when we're facing any other situation. Those are reflections that we need to carry on based on those policy standards that we have here. And I think I was really moved with the report of the BIPOC staff and teachers. Then I say we need to pay attention on some of the language being taken inside, especially when we talk about some of the standards on the cultural humility and also some of the professional development. Then we don't have to forget that before we come to that stage, the equity lens come to the hiring process. How we attract BIPOC teachers and staff, how we bring them to the hiring process where the equity lens is more valuable. And then as soon we recognize that, we can start moving with those different policy standards on the professional development, and also navigate and cultivate the culture humility, where everybody can recognize that we have race, we have some social justice work to do here, and we can all work together. See, this is the frame, the lens that I come out from the last conversation, because I didn't want that conversation to go all over different directions. So we're losing the value of what we want to do and what we want to accomplish, but just narrow on that sense, ownership and customizing our own value for what we believe as a policy, equity policy in our Portland Public School. Yes.
Thanks, Mickey. So that's a good segue to some of the just quick framing, or not even framing, just explanation of what you're looking at. But before I do that, I'll pause and see if members Burke and Rodriguez, if either of you have any questions about just the process point. If not, I know we're excited to get you guys looking at the policy itself and feedback on that. Okay. So I think so what we thought we would do in terms of time here is I'll give a little bit of orientation to what's written here, and then we'll give you guys 5 minutes to read it more closely. I apologize. Please change your view setting. Is that to me, Adam?
No, okay. It was a attendee comment.
Oh, got it. Okay, thanks. And then we'll give you 5 minutes to read it. I think for you guys, you have like a Google Doc, but we have PDF version attached on Board Docs if there's people tuning in. And then after you've read it, we're going to take clarifying questions in terms of what you see here, and then probing questions, and then move into feedback and what you like and what you would change or adjust or add. So that's the plan. In terms of the, and I will share my screen now really quick, actually, just to, okay. So this is what you'd be looking at. You might be looking at it in PDF. So basically what you see here is just a framing purpose for this policy. Mickey was talking about a desire to have this be specific to Portland Public Schools context in our community. And so there's an attempt in this to express what the point of the policy is, to make connections to Portland specifically. And so you'll see some acknowledgement of that in those next two paragraphs, as well as you'll see here in the final sentence of the framing purpose, we have integrated the actual language of the equity goal from the Portland Promise. So just wanting to call out that there's attempts to make really specific connections to our context, so that this is, our policy. It's not just like a generic equity policy that you could drop into any district. So that's the first section. And then the next section Barrett spoke to, which is then we get into definitions. And like Barrett had mentioned, and Mickey spoke to this too, we really want this policy to, in part, clarify and align our community around our definition of equity and what we mean by that. And so you'll read in a moment that we kind of tee that up and then define equity, racial equity, and equity lens. And then the third section gets into the policy standards. And we've talked briefly in updates with you about the kinds of sections we would have in here. These are not, you'll see they are still quite drafty. But what we're trying to do is kind of get more and more honed in on what's the language that we really want to see show up here. This is much more streamlined from the last draft we tuned with the work group, because I think they were really looking for some clear, kind of more concise articulations of what the policy sets forth as an expectation. It is a question mark I have, and I think we've been grappling with in terms of how much to spell all this out. So as you're reading it and giving us feedback, that will be helpful to hear your take in terms of kind of depth versus breadth in what we want to name and call out. So in terms of these sections, there's a big question about land acknowledgement. I think Bridget Neptune is a parent in our district and has been a consultant to the district for a long time about our Wabanaki Studies curriculum. And she gave feedback to include our land acknowledgement. At first, we talked about that being in the framing context, but I wasn't sure kind of how that fits. So definitely interested in some more feedback on how to speak to that in this policy. The staff section is not built out much at all yet. And I know Mickey was just speaking to that as a key piece. So interested in feedback there. Do want to name again that we're really toggling on this line of this is a policy. So this is not sort of at the level of prescription that an actual like strategic plan would be. And so just really trying to hold that and think about that as we decide what goes in and doesn't go into the policy language. Capacity building is a little bit more fleshed out. These A, B, C, D, E are kind of pulled from things people liked in the first iteration, but they haven't been tuned down so that the language flows. So these are all cut and pasted in, just so you're aware. Data utilization, I think is straightforward, speaks for itself. The curriculum and instruction section is not tuned down. I have the A through F as kind of some of the key points we want to hit, and then cut and pasted this language in that was in an earlier draft, some of which is pulled from Baltimore's policy and other policies that we looked at. Resource allocation also kind of has a frame that we wrote, but then cut and paste some sections from other policies on that point. And that's true for accountability and communication as well. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And so we will take 5 minutes and just check in on if you've had a chance to read it. And again, after we look through it, we'll take questions just to clarify what's here and what's intended. And then talk through feedback about general, positive, and kind of critical feedback, as well as take your input on the specific things I talked about in terms of what to include and some of the other things that I pointed out where we have some questions. So before we go into reading, any questions about that or good for 5? Okay, I'll be a timekeeper and I'll check in 5 just to see if you need another minute or 2. Great.
I'm good now, Malia.
Awesome. Great. So we're just going to use like a loose tuning protocol. So just starting before we get into feedback, would love to just give some time for people to ask questions, starting with just clarifying. So if you're like, what does that mean? Or where did that come from? Let's do a period of clarifying questions and I'll watch our time on that.
I can jump in. Just question, no feedback, right?
There will be plenty of time for feedback.
I guess on the staff, the section of the staff that you're still waiting to add to, is that going to go? I'm just trying to figure out what direction that's going to head into. Is that going to go towards like the HR part, like the hiring piece, or more of like the culture part, like when we talk about the insights, the BIPOC staff insights report? Or I guess those things obviously interconnect a lot, but am I wrong by trying to differentiate those, or is that all going to be encompassed in the staff section?
I had imagined all together. I sort of think of HR as the whole continuum of attracting, hiring, engaging, retaining people. So that's how I had assumed it would get built out, but I'll say that. And then certainly, we'll get to feedback if folks have different ideas about that.
I think also under the staff section would be kind of the, it also maybe it's in the capacity building section. So it's like, how do we make the link between those things for the part that's about staff professional development, and that is like ongoing work and that kind of piece. feels really central to the staff role, but it is about the, the internal capacity. So yeah, I think about that there too.
Yeah.
And also I was thinking, I think I shared last time, if I want to emphasize what Roberto just mentioned, I think I mentioned last time, if you remember, is that from the HR perspective, how we incorporate that language on the contracts. I mean, they have to revisit to see what they have, the way to retain BIPOC for diversity and on the, like I have a language then I think I shared last time, language into the contract to require commitment to anti-racist and equity work by all employees. I mean, some of the ideas been guiding to that direction, just Robert just mentioned about the HR, because everything is just is a lot of happening. Then the HR has to revisit to make sure that are they retain and are they working to the equity lens by adding some of the narrative and language than we got from the BIPOC reports.
Yeah. Yeah. So Lindsay, if you're taking meeting minutes, I'd put that more as a piece of feedback. And we can come back to that. Just quickly though, to clarify, Mickey, I'm glad you raised that up. And Barrett, you were kind of saying this, but in the capacity building section, it is very connected to staff, which is why it flows right after that. And there's language there now, though, Mickey, you might have feedback to make it stronger that speaks to all staff participate in this PD. And then in that letter E under capacity building was added since we had feedback conversations, which speaks to integrating equity literacy into the evaluation tools. So we just used a generic feedback and evaluation tools used to develop educators and staff must integrate an equity orientation. It didn't say like TVAL or something because it would be applicable to all staff evaluation tools, not just the teacher evaluation tool. So anyway, there's some places where that's starting to live. And then there's finally down in the very final section, accountability. It speaks to sort of ensuring implementation and follow through, and gives the example, in addition, the district must monitor follow through on expectations such as a staff attending equity-based professional development, et cetera. So those are a few places where we're trying to pull in that feedback. But, again, it might not be sufficient, but just wanting to point out that Roberto, to your question about like the staff stuff, I guess it pops in a few different sections, not just that staff area. Any other questions before we can go deeper into all the feedback I'm sure you all have?
I have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
If neither Mickey or Roberto has others, it's at the heart of this in the definitions where it says equity, and I'll post this in chat. Equity is when all students are held to high expectations, inclusive and reflective of their lived experiences. So first I wanted to hear more about inclusive and reflective of their lived experiences. And then I was unclear about their identities, and then the parentheticals about including ability.
Great. Barrett, can you chime in on that?
Sorry. Yes. So let me get to the right page. Sorry. I think what that is speaking to is to try and get at, the ways in which identity, sorry. No, thank you. I'm being handed notes. You can go. Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, what that's getting at is like that their lived experience is inclusive of, identities people hold and the impact that has had, like, the ways in which inequities have impacted that and their experiences. And so I think that's what that's all kind of driving towards. And, perhaps is, one of the sentences that has too many words and needs, some reorganization of them, but it's to try and be encompassing of the multitude of identities people hold and how that plays out, and that when we're talking about high expectations, that's reflective of who people are and the different types of learners that we all are. And yeah.
Okay. And then my second clarifying question is, with the last sentence in that same definition, have you come to the conclusion that this is the singular definition or singular outcome that we are driving for? And what does it mean?
Do you want to take a stab at that, Barrett, just because I think this is language you had originally drafted, or I could answer too.
Well, I got held up when he said, is this the singular outcome? Because I don't know that I don't think we'll land that plane, you know, like, I think that there's just so many layers. I think that's why I'm like, that's a big question. That's what I'm sitting with as you said.
Yeah, and I ask it purposefully because the way that it's posited, and if this is going to be the authoritative reference point for things, it says it's achieved when, you know, and so it sets it up to be that. So that's, I'm hedging over to feedback, but I was truly asking it with curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's meant to be an example of like what that means.
Right. I was going to say that, which I think will lead to where your feedback will go, Adam, which is, I don't know that it is something we've talked a lot about and had a lot of debate and discussion around in terms of this is like the definitive singular answer to that question. I mean, do you guys, it seems like you're excited to get into the feedback. So I think we can go there, and it's a small group. So if you have questions as we go, or if we want to clarify things further, we will. So Why don't we shift into feedback? And Lindsay, if you can, you know, I know you're taking meeting minutes. So if you can just make sure you grab all this, and then Barrett and Nikki, we can look through those minutes as our notes, you know, to incorporate the feedback that comes. So let's get into it. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you think about kind of the right balance of too high level, too specific from a policy context?
I'll start. I'll jump in. So I guess I'll start with a question. So I mean, this is, in my opinion, like really, like this has the makings of like being a really amazing document, right? Like first impression, I was like, wow, like this is awesome. Like some of the, how do you say, like those, like stopgaps that I had, like bringing, like as I was reading the things that I was like looking for, like it was hitting, and I was like, all right, never mind. Like we hit that. All right, never mind. Like, and it kept kind of like checking off all these like things that I felt like I wanted, like it's things that I saw in some of the examples that Barrett shared, of the model policies or example policies. And so one of the things in particular that was like almost like a theme in the other ones that immediately I noticed we didn't do, we didn't frame equity from we got to pick up these poor little people that are at the bottom. We framed it from we will all benefit, like equity is for all of us, right? And so I love that about it, and that seemed almost like clear right from the jump. And so then I guess on that end, I like the paragraph, actually, the letter A description, and how it achieves that, and it doesn't necessarily have like this scoop from the bottom up appeal, but rather like literally just like from all around kind of encompassing. And then I guess the other part or the second part that I thought as feedback, how much and it's more of a question, I guess, how much do you expect it to change? Like how close to, this is not like the same as a question, like is this like the ultimate, but how much editing do you expect? Or what's the level of confidence that you have? Because you've already had some really amazing focus groups and people already giving insights. again, as if I had like a quote unquote checklist of like people that I'd like to, or groups that I'd like to have involved, I feel like you've already checked off a bunch of them. So how much more do you expect to alter it? Again, I think it already has the makings of being a really strong policy.
I would say, and obviously Mickey Bear jump in too, but I think that I think this is definitely a draft 1. I mean, it might be a 1.5 from the one we tuned with the work group. The one we tuned with the work group had a lot of things kind of thrown in, so we were trying to like kind of hone it down. I will say that a lot of the input we've gotten so far, Roberto, has been kind of proactive input. So the next stage of stakeholder groups will be kind of tuning groups where they are actually looking at and reacting to a draft. And that we're doing earlier in the stakeholder process than we expected, at least what I expected, because what we started to realize is that we wanted people to kind of be generative, but that it feels like it might be easier for people to get really at the heart of what they want to see, what they feel is missing, if they're able to see something concrete and react to it. And so we just felt like the process naturally led toward, okay, it feels like it's time to put something out there so that people can really tune it. So I do think it's still drafty, especially in the standards section. So that will have to get, fleshed out more. And then I would expect I would be surprised if the sections are like wildly off, I think we have like the general purpose framing, the general definitions, and the general right kind of elements. But I think the specifics will probably, get a lot of feedback from you guys today. And then as we go through this next round of bringing this forward to more stakeholders.
Yeah. And what I can add is what I'm really waiting is the student voice. So I think that's a piece of the language. And when I look at it and I read, I say, yes, that's what I was looking for. So it's just something just missing right here is because we're putting that one for them to be able to succeed. So making that foundation for them to be able to thrive. But I think everything gonna be giving more sense when we get them on the piece of the paper. What really they want, what they see themselves, what the definition, because they're living that one in our building every day. So that's the piece that I think then we need to adding and waiting for the student group to be able to add some other inputs. And I think because we already get from the work team, and I think we didn't want to keep adding, otherwise people are gonna start going to different directions because adding ideas on the top of the ideas. So I think we already get the concrete general foundation, but we're missing those branches. The student branches to be adding on the top of that.
Great. So yeah, I appreciate that. That's really important point, Mickey. Obviously, I'm there with you. Thank you. So I think, like I said, first impression, like this is looking awesome. Like this is like exactly what I was hoping we'd start with, or like even be at. So this is really, and as Adam said at the very start of the meeting, I didn't even know we were at this point, right? Like I didn't even know there was like an actual draft. So this is awesome. Good job, guys. I can't wait to see what else comes up.
I have a little feedback, Maria, and I just found out in capacity building. I just need to bring my thoughts out loud on the D, because the way I see that is that school and district staff utilize a set of questions for decision making that ensures ways of thinking and problem solving through any equity lens. So here is something that I look at in my eyes and I say, well, before we come to a decision making and be a problem solving, thinking to the lens, the dynamic power, on the leadership position need to be balanced. Who we have on the decision making table, on the school and the staff. So our policy need to reflect how we shift the structure of the power. Some of them be equitable for people who didn't have a voice yesterday, but beyond the decision making. So that D can be more reflecting on more equity sense, because you got questions and feedback and decision coming from different perspectives and different background and diversity. So I think maybe we need to have a line who really can say as the leadership and the power dynamic distribution that we have, then we need to look at, because I came out something that Roberto mentioned last time and really get me on my head is that, yes, that's fine. When we want to increase the hiring on the BIPOC, everything, building the culture, humility, and going to all the foundation, like the teacher, the foundation that we try to build on the professional development, but who we have on those decision making, who we have on those leadership positions can, shift some of the dynamic power when we try to solve a problem. So something that we really need to reflect on, that capacity building, because that's a big improvement. Then we really need to see that one to that equity lens when it comes to take a decision. How we come to utilize the set of questions. Who are those people?
Lindsay, can I just add, just because for the notes, so I don't forget from what Mickey just shared. Mickey, it makes me think about, we sort of drafted a decolonizing framework for curriculum decision-making, modeled off the Abbey Museum's 3 kind of concepts of truth-telling, collaboration, and centering at the Abbey, it's Indigenous voices, but sort of can be applied more broadly. So it really makes me think about who's at the table and whose perspective is represented. So Lindsay, can you just make that decolonizing framework note there? Because I think that has some cool language that speaks to what you're saying, and that resonates a ton. So.
All right.
If there aren't other pieces of feedback, I'll note that I did just chat member Yusuf, who I saw in the participants, to see if he wanted to join on the panelist side. So just let us know, Yusuf, if you'd like us to make you a panelist. Roberto and Mickey, okay if I share feedback? Okay. Yeah, so first of all, there's the positive. Like, we're here. What's here is good. Like, good things. I think picking up first off where you just were, this in part seems like an amalgamation of both feedback or input from the folks that you convened, as well as the various like theoretical or different approaches that we've interacted with, like Gorski's, the redress, that sort of stuff we just brought up, the decolonizing framework. Mm-hmm. And I find them each powerful, and I don't know that it's worth the exercise necessarily, but it seems like picking one and then using that to like systematically go through those categories, or like to acknowledge what we already know. If we recognize in this, space, this exists, we're going to respond here, that sort of thing could be useful. And then it just doesn't seem like we're using the rhetoric to use the rhetoric, we're applying it. So that was one piece of feedback for me. If we're going to commit to one of those tools, those frameworks, then actually apply it.
Adam, do you mind if I, just in the spirit of this being more of like just workshop-y, could you? So I definitely hear what you're saying. You are noticing an attempt to pick up some of the language that we've started to build as common shared language, right? So that was an intentional move on the part of like trying to make this specific and unique to us, not just any old generic thing. So Gorski is for sure something we use his framework a lot as an example. So I hear you for sure, but like trying to imagine taking a next step on that, like, could you get a little more concrete about like just like what that might sound like, look like a little bit? Because I like the idea, but I'm afraid I won't know what to then go do after we hang up.
Sure. Well, you've already got to start. So I'm thinking about particularly the policy standards. So with land acknowledgement, you already have the word recognize. Portland Public Schools recognizes, right?
I see.
And then towards the end, there's kind of like the response, which is work is our commitment in this case, right?
Okay.
So in the same way, I think it could be staff. Portland Public Schools recognizes, what the condition is right now. Our response, like that sort of that's the repetition or the pulling through that I'm talking about.
I like that. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. It's so loud for me is the quote from Antoinette Carroll that I bring forth all the time of the fact that we're a nation founded upon the genocide of one people and the enslavement of another, and we've yet to reconcile this legacy. It feels like that kind of a large-scale anchoring acknowledgement could exist in terms of this purpose and scope, probably right as part of the PPS recognizes the historical, generational, and compounding reality of the systems. But like, where do those come from? And where does it come from is that truth of how our country was founded and what we've yet to do, right? So that comes up for me. Just pause me if you want to comment or discuss things. Otherwise, I'll keep going. There's the equity definition isn't clear. Right now it is too long. My recommendation is just to use like the simplicity of what you have with racial equity as like the first thing you say. And then if you want to expand from there with more, then that's how I would approach that. So take it or leave that for feedback. I think the equity lens is, I'm really glad to see that you are including it. And I think there's just wordsmithing to like polish it and make it really, really effective. And then in the policy standards, I saw that I had this question as I was reading it, like, where are we accountable to facing the history and doing the healing work that's needed? And I think it's in professional development in particular, where there's, some acknowledgement of the facing history, but I'm not quite sure where healing shows up in this body of work still. Then I have this question, which is where is culture? And I have to, on the one hand, acknowledge that like it's the sum of everything that's here. But for me, that's also getting out of the policy level of things, if you will. What I think I want and what I would project others want is a change from how our students and staff would talk about their current experience and what they'll say in the future if we're successful. Yeah. And part of that is like, it's safe to be me here. I'm supported. I'm seen. I don't have to be like everybody else. Like, that level of things. And that's part of the culture piece that I don't see in the language or the words that we have here yet. So I put that out as like provocation, is that what we want at a very base level to be different in our schools, leaning into Dr. Love's work, instead of the spirit murdering that happens now, the glowing up of folks, that sort of thing.
Can I pause you on that one?
Yeah,
and just question for you, but anyone else too, hearing that. So do you think the culture, like what you're naming around culture, do you imagine that living in the framing piece as it relates to the outcomes we're striving for, or do you imagine it as like another section under policy standards? Or I hear what you're saying. It does resonate, but I'm curious, like, how would you integrate that feedback in terms of this structure that we have right now?
I don't know how to make it a policy standard other than calling it culture and then like something. But so for that reason, I think the overall framing and kind of one of the objectives makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, but okay.
Yeah. And I think that's gonna be that's gonna help us to hold people accountable in the end, because when we're projecting ourselves to how we measure the success, just like Adam just mentioned, the platform where our students and staff can see themselves right now, and then what they can say after a couple of years when we have the implementation of that policy, how we measure that success over time. And I think if we had that one with a separate paragraph, like that's just that culture, then we need to cultivate. And that culture is the one going to start building on success. I mean, we will be able to measure the success and have some stories. I mean, the powerful then is going to be storytelling, how the success is been building year to year, and that's where we're holding accountable. And I think joining on that is what I see the report to the board, and I don't feel like we need to be annually. I don't feel like we need to be once a year. And I think if we can go twice a year at least, we can have a time to look at the concrete action and see the challenges and be able to adjust some of the strategies to move forward. Because the thing I all the time been advocating is that we wait until the end, and sometimes is that when you have something in the checking out twice a year, we got a feedback, and then we can see the data and look at the facts and look at the evaluation measurement. We can be able to project, okay, this is a good implementation of the policy, or we need to adjust some of the areas. So I think going forward, we really need to adjust the accountability area on B to move that one to the different directions. Annually, I don't think so it's going to help us that much to do evaluation and to make sure then, we're going to the right direction. Especially when we adding that culture as a root. So I think we really need to look at that lens where we're going to report, and when are we going to do it, and how often.
So one question I had, Becky, I feel like that one gets at this theme, that this recurring question I have about level of how much are we spelling out sort of exactly what has to happen in policy. It's a genuine question for me. So your point on that one, we should be reporting out more than annually. In my mind, there would be many kind of formative steps where we're pulling up, and as we do now, and we keep trying to get better at, to look at, are we on track to where we want to be by the end of the year? And if not, why not? What do we do next? And so in my mind, some of that is that happens. That's just managing toward outcomes effectively. At what point should the policy dictate those kinds of moves and sort of enshrined in policy? Right. I don't know. That's just something I guess just want to be transparent that throughout this policy comes up for me, in terms of, and even we were looking at the transgender gender expansive policy as a model that felt really good in terms of where it landed. And it's much shorter and higher level, I feel, than where this is right now. And, I could see the feedback on this getting us even more detailed. So I just want to put that out for conversation because it's a struggle on this one.
Can I jump in? I just because we're getting to 7 o'clock, and I appreciate how much more work we still have to do here. But that I think fundamentally, like I said, I feel like we are in a good place. So excuse me if this completely misses the mark, but I've been lately learning a lot about charts and statistics and more of technical stuff and quantitative stuff. So when you think of equities, you're thinking about the total sum of all of your holdings, right? And that's based on their value. And your holdings are made of different assets, right? Different stocks, different shares. And each of those shares accrues value based on what you invest in them. And you invest in them based on supply and demand, right? So if your child has a supply and demand, a need, right? And you supply the demand of that need, it increases value. And if you do that to all of your assets, all of your students, the entirety of your organization, your portfolio gains value. Your equity increases. You quantify your equity by the sum of your total assets. So in that definition of equity, that makes perfect sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did that miss the mark?
No.
I didn't know where that was going. I didn't know if I was going to like it, but I get it now.
Yeah, me too. I get it now too. Well, these stocks and the
Yeah. Like, I don't know if I want stocks and students to be
supply and demand, and you're talking about meeting every child of what they need, and you're trying to increase the value of them, right?
No.
Cumulatively, you're increasing the equitable. That's equity because we all benefit from it.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe I did miss the mark.
No. Yeah, I'm trying to say you didn't miss the mark.
I'm just trying to get caught up on like all the financial knowledge you just dropped, and if I could translate.
Well, if you want to go even further, here's another layer to it. As you're trying to assess whether your chart is heading in the right direction, you use different different indicators, like different things that you measure, right? But you don't just use one indicator, right? Because not just one is going to be completely reliable. So you use a sum of them. So your indicators for us, for example, includes like surveys and some of this data and all these things. And cumulatively, all of this data eventually tells you that you're heading in the right direction. Furthermore, the progression of all of this movement, because you're trying to progress, you're trying to advance, for example, progressive ideas, are based on support and resistance. Right? So as you build support, you know that there's a foundational place that you're not going to go further below than that. But as you get more support, you might break a level of resistance. Resistance is the force that is kind of keeping you from advancing things. So once you break a level of resistance, that becomes then now a level of support. So you know that you're not going to go further than that. So it's all about building momentum, organizing, passing levels of resistance, making those levels of support. And again, you do that by increasing your equity, by increasing the total sum of value of all of your assets, which in our case is our students.
And I think those have become your benchmarks to evaluate success from the road to come. Yes, those are metrics and benchmarks. Then you got to evaluate that, and that's exactly why you're building on those challenge. So you're building support on those challenges on the top of each other, and that's exactly you come out to success.
Yeah. So I'll use that to circle back to your question, Millie, of how specific to get. I come from a practice that you do be specific. Whether it's the SMART goal world, but also in policy. That's why when I brought forward, or was planning on bringing forward, the outdoor learning policy, I had a 50% measure in there because otherwise accountability isn't there. It's a spirit, it's a thing, but it leaves so much room for interpretation that it's hard to hold for accountability. So I think it's the right question to keep moving forward, and I think we'll hear from different sources, different thinking on what a preference is. But when we're talking about equity, we're talking about having reports. We have this one clause that defines one way that we're successful in equity. I would keep pushing for further specificity as we best understand it, while leaving the language for that. We'll continue to understand where there's equity and where there remains inequity. But I don't know how vague high level gets us to where we want to go through this effort right now.
Mm-hmm. It's helpful.
From a feedback perspective, I circle back and I saw your comment. I'm not trying to hold you here. We're not going to stay, but because there's still conversation left to have in terms of our time. Mm-hmm. With the culture piece, culture is the interaction between people and environment. And environment is something I don't see addressed here. I don't see built environment addressed. I don't see food addressed. I don't see, it's there from a pedagogical perspective in terms of teaching tools and approaches. But there's lots of other things that make up culture that aren't specifically addressed yet. We have a very colonial building environment that, now we've fallen into this. Our schools look like jails because of the building codes and funding formulas that we're accountable to. and stuff like that. So there's always going to be a limit to perhaps what we can do as long as we're using state and federal funding to build our buildings, but there's still levels of environment that can be different, that would not promote inequities and oppression. And then food, I've had good conversations with Jane about, the recipes that we use, where are our recipes coming from, things like that. There's other ways in which we can see ourselves reflected or not reflected throughout our school experience.
So that hits at this recurring theme for me. So that's super helpful. We could look at trying to draft another, what are we calling it? Policy standard on that. It brings up for me, whenever we're talking about equity, is it should apply to everything. And so what gets named as a sort of policy standard, versus not. And so another example that I was thinking about is I don't really feel like when you said culture and environment, it doesn't currently speak to all of the work we're doing with the student policies around like building culture for students and restorative practices and those types of things. And so I had a moment of being like, well, that needs to be in here. But then I was like, well, we have like all these other policies that are really about that. And this policy says that for any policy we make, we should apply this perspective and lens to it. So anyway, I can get myself thinking into a rabbit hole on that. But when you brought up those things, that's what it brings up for me. It's like, yeah, but then where do we stop in terms of like how many, things we add to this that are a part of the entire institution. So it's a reflection and a question. Right? Yeah.
We might not know until we know how far we go. And the equity lens would cover anything that's missed, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's what I have for feedback. I'm done.
That's all?
Do you really want to?
Those are some easy tweaks. Thank you, Member Burke.
Yeah, you're welcome. That's what I'm here for.
Mm-hmm.
Any other feedback or comments from members?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would just, one quick thing, and again, Mickey Barrett, jump in here if to clarify or disagree with me if I get this wrong. But first of all, thank you all for the feedback. That was incredibly helpful, super rich feedback. And it's a lot to like figure this out. So, but it was meaty, rich feedback. So I'm excited to debrief with Barrett and Mickey and then try to incorporate some of that. So we'll do that as a next step. We have work group meetings already established, recurring on our calendars. We're getting the stakeholder meetings set up. So all that's underway. I wanted to just wrap up by talking timeline because we've had some interesting and kind of good discussions and debates about how to think about timeline in this policy process. So just for folks who don't remember, for people who are listening, it's kind of hilarious to think about our original timeline, which I think was to have like a really fleshed out draft done before the winter holiday break. So that's funny. And I think take two is to have all of our definitions complete by winter break. But ultimately the conversation we had is around the process matters, and that we didn't want to like drive toward outcomes and deadlines for the sake of hitting them, that engaging community in this process is as important as product. So with that in mind, we've kind of allowed ourselves the time and space to kind of be flexible, adjust. Okay, we're good with the stakeholder input. Now we want to get reaction. And that's felt really good. It does. I would assert that I think we could get to the point where we have something complete before in and ready to bring to the board to vote before we leave for the summer. I think it would be like end of the school year. But I think that would feel good because this did start last year. So it's been sort of out there for quite a long time, and is, the big substantive policy coming out of this committee over the past year and a half. And so I just wanted to say that and see if anybody had any final feedback on that, because it would be helpful, I think, to know if we agree that now we're far enough along for that to be a good target to aim for, that we would know that, and that would help Mickey and Barrett and me work with the work group to try to get to that place. So that's what I'm thinking. Does anybody have concerns or feedback on that?
That feels good to me.
Okay. And Mickey and Barrett, does that feel like that matches kind of what we've been trying to say? Okay, perfect. Okay. So I could, I think, Adam, we can talk in terms of upcoming meetings, but I feel like this will come back probably in a much more almost final version, because that's where you guys will do final tuning and make your decision to vote it, out of committee. So we'll have another pass in probably a couple months to do that. Sound good? All right. Great. Well, then I guess that's a wrap for now. I will also just say, it's a super work in progress. So if after this, if you have other thoughts or anything, just reach out. We're psyched for feedback. And if you have wordsmithing, like Adam, when you've been talking about some of these outcomes of equity, like if you have like some words that you feel like this might capture it, would appreciate getting those through email or whatever form.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Malia's thanks and gratitude for the tuning and conversation. It's super helpful. Much appreciation.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Lots of appreciation to you all for moving this forward in the way that you are. And so a motion to adjourn. So moved, seconded, we're adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.